How long can you wait before hope goes quiet? How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? Psalm 13 to 1-2. David does not open with reverence. He opens with time. How long? Not why. Not what should I do. How long? This is the question people ask after explanations stop helping. How long is not curiosity. It is fatigue speaking. It is the sound of faith that has not disappeared, but has slowed under weight. David is not unsure God exists. He's unsure God is still engaged. Will you forget me forever? This is not theological confusion. It is relational fear. Being forgotten hurts more than being corrected. Silence wounds deeper than rejection. David does not accuse God of cruelty. He fears irrelevance, that the relationship still exists, but no longer includes attention. How long will you hide your face from me? Hiddenness is different from absence. Absence ends relationship. Hiddenness stretches it. Hiddenness keeps hope alive while starving certainty. This is where waiting becomes dangerous, because you cannot argue with what you cannot see. You cannot negotiate with silence. You can only endure it. How long must I take counsel in my soul? This is where the waiting turns inward. When God is quiet, the mind becomes loud. You replay conversations. You imagine outcomes. You rehearse failure. You become your own advisor, and the advice grows harsher by the day. Counseling yourself is exhausting because your mind does not know when to stop. And David admits it. He does not spiritualize overthinking. He confesses it. And have sorrow in my heart all the day? Not occasionally. Not seasonally. All the day. This is sustained emotional weight. Low-grade grief that never lifts. The kind that allows you to function but never fully rest. The kind that turns waiting into background ache. David is not dramatic here. He is precise. He describes what it feels like to remain faithful without relief. This psalm is not written from the moment of crisis. It is written from the middle of endurance, the place where prayers have already been offered, where tears have already fallen, where hope has already tried optimism and found it thin. This is not the beginning of waiting. This is waiting after waiting. How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? The enemy here is not just a person. It is the narrative that grows when nothing changes. The voice that says, "This is permanent." The thought that whispers, "God has moved on." The pressure that suggests your patience is now foolish. David names the humiliation of delay because delay feels like defeat, even when nothing has technically been lost. Waiting reshapes your identity if you let it. It tempts you to believe that being unfinished means being unworthy. David refuses that lie by speaking directly to God instead of about him. This is important. Faith survives waiting not by positive thinking but by direct address. David does not edit his words to sound correct. He does not cushion the accusation. How long? He keeps the relationship intact by refusing to pretend. Pretending kills faith faster than doubt. Doubt still reaches outward. Pretending closes inward. Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. David asks to be seen again, not fixed, not promoted, not rewarded. Seen. Light up my eyes. This is not about vision. It is about vitality. Darkness dulls perception. Waiting drains energy. You do not lose belief first. You lose sharpness. Everything feels muted. Color thins. Joy delays. Lighting the eyes means restoring aliveness, lest I sleep the sleep of death. David is not talking about dying. He is talking about numbing. The danger is not collapse. It is resignation. The slow acceptance that this is all life will be. Faith rarely dies suddenly. It fades quietly. David feels that risk and speaks before it takes root. He does not ask God to end the wait. He asks God to keep him awake within it. This is subtle. Most people pray for change. David prays for preservation, because endurance without awareness becomes bitterness. My enemy will say, I have prevailed. When delay speaks long enough, it begins to sound authoritative. It pretends to interpret reality. David does not allow delay to become doctrine. He brings the distortion into conversation with God. This is what faith does in waiting. It keeps the dialogue open even when answers do not arrive. David's prayer does not end with clarity. It ends with posture. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. Notice the tense. Not I will trust, not I am learning to trust. I have trusted. This is memory speaking. David reaches backward when forward vision fails. Steadfast love is not something he feels right now. It is something he remembers being real. Memory becomes an anchor when perception cannot be trusted. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation, shall not now. David does not force joy. He schedules it, not as denial, but as direction. Faith, here, is temporal. It believes joy exists even if it is delayed. I will sing to the Lord, not because circumstances improved, but because he has dealt bountifully with me. Past tense, David's confidence is not based on change. It is based on history. He trusts God's character. When God's activity feels absent, this is mature faith. Not loud, not impressive, but durable. If you are listening and thinking, this sounds too familiar, that recognition matters because Psalm 13 does not shame delay. It dignifies it. It gives language to people who stayed when leaving would have been easier. It validates the exhaustion of unanswered prayer. It does not rush resolution. It allows waiting to be named without being fixed. And that honesty keeps faith alive long enough for restoration to arrive later. Not yet, but later. Waiting does something subtle to identity. At first, you wait for something, an answer, a shift, a sign. But over time, waiting begins to feel like a description of who you are. You stop saying, I'm waiting on this season, and start thinking, I'm the kind of person nothing moves for. This is where delay becomes dangerous. Not because it hurts, but because it redefines you. Psalm 13 is not simply about unanswered prayer. It is about how silence tries to rename the faithful. David feels that pressure. That is why his language stays relational instead of analytical. He does not ask God to explain himself. He asks God to remain visible. Light up my eyes, because when waiting drags on, the first thing you lose is not belief, it is orientation. You lose a sense of where you are in the story. You begin to wonder if you missed something, if you misunderstood your calling, if your patience has quietly turned into irrelevance. Waiting without markers makes people doubt their own discernment. David understands this risk. He knows that unanswered prayer can slowly teach the soul to lower its expectations, not just of circumstances, but of God himself. So he speaks before that lesson settles. Faith here is preventative, not preventative of pain, but of distortion. David keeps God in conversation so that silence does not get the final say. This is crucial. Many people think faith dies because prayers go unanswered. More often, faith erodes because silence is left uninterpreted. Silence, when unexplained, starts telling its own story. It suggests neglect. It implies abandonment. It hints that effort no longer matters. Psalm 13 interrupts that narrative by refusing to let silence stand alone. David drags the silence into relationship. How long? Not shouted, not dramatized, repeated. Repetition here is not lack of faith. It is persistence without spectacle. He does not escalate his tone. He does not threaten departure. He stays. Staying is the quiet hero of this psalm. Staying when prayers feel mechanical. Staying when hope no longer feels productive. Staying when faith does not offer emotional payoff. This is not inspirational faith. It is loyal faith. And loyalty does not require clarity, it requires presence. This is why David does not demand a timeline. He does not insist on resolution. He asks for enough light to remain awake inside the waiting. Lest I sleep the sleep of death, sleep here is not rest. It is surrender to numbness. The death David fears is not physical. It is the death of responsiveness. When you have waited too long, you stop reacting. You stop hoping, not out of wisdom, but out of self-protection. You dull your expectations, so disappointment hurts less. David recognizes that danger, and instead of numbing himself, he speaks. Speech becomes resistance, not resistance against God, resistance against resignation. This is what prayer becomes in long seasons. Not persuasion, not strategy, resistance to the idea that silence equals indifference, resistance to the voice that says, nothing is happening, so nothing matters. David's prayer refuses that conclusion. He does not deny the pain. He refuses its authority. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. Steadfast love is not dramatic love. It is not exciting love. It is love that does not change when conditions do. David anchors himself, not in what God is doing now, but in who God has already shown himself to be. This is not denial. It is memory deployed as survival. Memory becomes critical in waiting, because waiting distorts perception. It makes the present feel permanent. It convinces you that what you feel now is what you will always feel. David counters that distortion by reaching backward. He does not romanticize the past. He stabilizes the present with it. He has dealt bountifully with me. Past tense, this matters. David is not claiming victory. He is claiming continuity. God has been faithful before. Therefore, silence cannot be abandonment now. This logic does not erase pain. It limits its reach. Pain is allowed to exist, but not to narrate the whole story. That is the distinction Psalm 13 offers. Faith does not cancel pain. Faith constrains it. It gives pain boundaries. You may hurt, faith says, but you may not decide who I am. This is why David schedules joy instead of forcing it. My heart shall rejoice, not because he feels it now, but because he trusts God's character more than his current sensation. This is not optimism, it is allegiance. Allegiance to a God whose presence is not measured by speed. Waiting tests allegiance more than crisis ever could. Crisis invites God urgently. Waiting asks whether you will stay when urgency fades. Many people pray passionately in crisis. Fewer remain faithful in delay. Psalm 13 exists for those people, for the ones who did not leave, who did not collapse, who did not explode, but quietly wondered how long staying would be required. If you are listening and feel unseen by progress, unrewarded by effort, unnoticed by answers, Psalm 13 does not rush you forward. It stands with you inside the unresolved. It does not tell you that everything will make sense. It tells you that staying makes sense. Staying in relationship, staying honest, staying human. Faith here is not confidence. It is refusal to disappear, and that refusal is enough. Enough to keep the dialogue open. Enough to keep the soul responsive. Enough to prevent bitterness from hardening into belief. David's psalm ends without evidence of change, and that is intentional, because sometimes faith survives without resolution. Sometimes faith's role is not to produce answers, but to preserve integrity. Integrity of heart, integrity of relationship, integrity of self. Waiting will not always reward you quickly, but it will reveal what you are anchored to. Psalm 13 reveals this.